The unwelcome guest. My name is Margaret, and at 65 years old, I never imagined I would be living under the same roof as someone who clearly despised my very existence. But here I was, 6 months into this nightmare arrangement, sharing a home with my son David and his wife Lisa, a woman who had made it abundantly clear that she wanted me gone from the moment I moved in. It wasn't supposed to be this way. When I had my stroke last winter, David insisted that I come stay with them while I recovered. Just temporarily, Mom, he had assured me. Just until you're back on your feet. But 6 months later, I was still here, and Lisa's resentment had grown from barely concealed irritation to outright hostility. I suppose I should have seen the signs from the beginning. Lisa had never been particularly warm toward me, even during the 3 years she and David had been married. She was polite enough during family gatherings, the kind of politeness that felt like a thin layer of ice over deep, cold water. But I had attributed her coolness to shyness, or perhaps just the natural adjustment period that comes with joining a new family. I was wrong. Lisa didn't just dislike me, she hated me with a passion that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The history of our conflict. The problems began almost immediately after David brought Lisa home to meet me 4 years ago. She was 24 then, a petite blonde with sharp blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them when she looked at me. David was absolutely smitten, talking non-stop about how wonderful she was, how lucky he felt to have found her. "She's perfect, Mom," he would gush. "She's smart, beautiful, funny, everything I've ever wanted in a woman." I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But something about Lisa struck me as calculating, artificial. The way she would laugh just a little too loudly at David's jokes, the way she would touch his arm possessively when other women were around, the way she seemed to be performing the role of the perfect girlfriend rather than actually being one. But what bothered me most was how she treated the people she thought didn't matter: waitresses, store clerks, anyone she perceived as beneath her social status. I watched her be rude to a young cashier at the grocery store, snapping at the girl for being too slow. I saw her roll her eyes when David stopped to help an elderly man who had dropped his groceries in a parking lot. "We are going to be late," she had complained. "Can't someone else help him?" These moments revealed something about her character that David either couldn't see or chose to ignore. When I gently tried to mention my concerns, he became defensive. "Lisa's had a hard life, Mom," he would say. "She grew up poor, and she's worked really hard to get where she is. Maybe she seems a little guarded sometimes, but that's just because she's had to protect herself." I wanted to point out that having a difficult background didn't excuse being cruel to others, but I could see that David was deeply in love. So I kept my observations to myself and hoped that maybe I was wrong about her. I wasn't wrong. The wedding and early married life. The wedding was a lavish affair that I suspected was far beyond what David could afford. Lisa had insisted on having it at an expensive country club, with designer flowers, a 5-course dinner, and an open bar that lasted well into the night. When I offered to help with the costs, Lisa barely acknowledged my contribution. "Thank you," she said curtly when David told her about my check. "That's very generous." No warmth, no gratitude, just a cold acknowledgement of my financial assistance. During the reception, I watched Lisa work the room like a politician, charming David's friends and colleagues, making sure everyone knew about her new husband's successful career as a software engineer, subtly letting people know about their plans to buy a house in the prestigious Oakwood neighborhood. But I also noticed how she barely spoke to my side of the family. My sister Helen commented on it during the reception. "That new daughter-in-law of yours is quite something," Helen said, watching Lisa pose for photos with David's boss. "Very ambitious." "She makes David happy," I replied, though even then I wasn't entirely convinced. "Does she? Or does David make her happy? There's a difference, you know." Helen's words stayed with me long after the wedding was over. The first year of tension. In the first year of their marriage, I tried to build a relationship with Lisa. I invited them over for Sunday dinners, sent her birthday cards, offered to take her shopping or out for lunch. Every overture was met with polite refusal or grudging acceptance. When she did come to my house for dinner, she would spend the entire time on her phone, barely participating in conversation. If I asked about her job at the marketing firm, she would give one-word answers. If I tried to share stories about David's childhood, she would look bored or annoyed. "Mom, Lisa's just tired," David would say when I mentioned her behavior. "She works really hard, and she's still adjusting to being part of a family." Her own family wasn't very close. I learned bits and pieces about Lisa's background over time. Her parents had divorced when she was young. She had been raised primarily by her mother, who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. Her father was largely absent from her life. She had put herself through college and was fiercely independent. I could understand how that background might make someone guarded, but it didn't explain the active hostility I sensed from her. This wasn't just emotional distance. There was something almost predatory about the way she looked at me sometimes, as if she was calculating how to remove me from the equation entirely. The turning point came during their second year of marriage when David got a promotion that came with a significant salary increase. Suddenly, Lisa became much more interested in family gatherings, but only when the conversation turned to money or David's career prospects. The stroke that changed everything. Last February, I had a minor stroke while gardening in my backyard. Thankfully, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson found me and called 911. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and another month in rehabilitation, learning to walk steadily again and regaining full use of my right arm. The stroke wasn't severe, but it was a wake-up call. At 64, I was living alone in a 3-bedroom house, and the doctors recommended that I have someone nearby while I completed my recovery. "You should come stay with us," David insisted when we discussed my options. "We have the guest room, and Lisa works from home most days now. She can keep an eye on you while I'm at the office." I was hesitant. I valued my independence, and I wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of living under Lisa's roof. But David was insistent, and my other options weren't particularly appealing. "It'll just be for a few months," he promised. "Just until you're completely back to normal." Lisa was noticeably absent from these conversations about my living arrangements. When David finally told her what we had decided, her reaction was swift and sharp. "How long?" she asked, not even pretending to be pleased about the arrangement. "Just temporarily," David assured her. "Until she's fully recovered." "And how long is that exactly?" "The doctors think maybe 3 to 6 months. I saw Lisa's jaw clench, but she forced a smile. "Of course. Whatever Margaret needs." But I could see in her eyes that she was already calculating how to make my stay as miserable as possible. Life in Lisa's house. From the moment I moved into David and Lisa's guest room, the atmosphere in the house became thick with tension. Lisa was never overtly rude. She was too smart for that, especially when David was around. But her hostility expressed itself in 1,000 small ways that made it clear I was not welcome. She would forget to buy the foods I could eat. I was on a restricted diet following my stroke. She would schedule loud phone calls for work during the times when I usually napped. She would use the washing machine when I had specifically asked to do a load of laundry, forcing me to wait hours for my clothes to be clean. "I'm so sorry," she would say with false sweetness when these incidents occurred. "I completely forgot you needed to use the machine. I've just been so busy with work." David would always take her side. "Mom, Lisa's juggling a lot right now. Try to be more flexible with the household schedule." But I could see what she was doing. Every mistake was calculated to make my life more difficult, to make me feel like a burden, to drive me to the point where I would leave on my own. The kitchen became a particular battleground. Lisa had never been much of a cook. They usually ordered takeout or ate simple meals that required minimal preparation. But suddenly, she became very territorial about the kitchen space. "I'd prefer if you didn't use the stove when I'm working," she told me one day when I was trying to make myself some soup. "The smell is distracting, and I have an important client call." Her work consisted of sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, doing what appeared to be social media marketing for various small businesses. Hardly the kind of concentrated effort that would be disrupted by the aroma of chicken soup. But I complied, eating cold sandwiches and salads rather than cause conflict in David's home. The escalation. As the weeks turned into months, Lisa's behavior became increasingly bold. She would have loud conversations with her friends about how inconvenient it was to have a house guest who was taking forever to recover. She would make pointed comments about how much the grocery bill had increased since I moved in. She would sigh dramatically whenever I asked for help reaching something on a high shelf or carrying something heavy. "I never signed up to be a caregiver," I heard her say to someone on the phone one day. "I married David, not his mother." The comment stung because it revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of family relationships. When you marry someone, you do marry their family, their responsibilities, their history, their obligations. That's what marriage means. But Lisa seemed to view our family as obstacles to her personal happiness rather than people she now had a connection to. David, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to his wife's behavior. When I tried to bring up my concerns, he would dismiss them. "Lisa's just stressed about having her routine disrupted," he would say. "She's not used to sharing her space. Try to be patient with her." But I could see that Lisa wasn't just stressed, she was actively trying to make me miserable. And unfortunately, she was succeeding. The breaking point came in late July when I overheard a conversation between Lisa and David that was never meant for my ears. The conversation that revealed everything. I was coming back from a walk around the neighborhood when I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. The sliding door to the backyard was slightly open, and their words carried clearly to where I stood on the patio. 6 months. David. It's been 6 months, and she's showing no signs of leaving, Lisa was saying, her voice tight with anger. She's still recovering, Lisa. The physical therapy is going well, but these things take time. Bullshit. She's perfectly fine. She goes on walks, she drives herself to appointments, she does her own laundry. She's milking this situation because she doesn't want to live alone anymore. That's not fair. My mother isn't manipulative. Isn't she? David, open your eyes. She's moved into our house, disrupted our lives, and made it impossible for us to have any privacy or intimacy. When was the last time we had sex without worrying about her hearing us? When was the last time we could walk around our own house in our underwear? When was the last time we could have a conversation without her inserting herself into it? I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger. The accusation that I was deliberately prolonging my recovery was both untrue and deeply hurtful. I had been working hard with my physical therapist and had been steadily improving. I wanted to return to my own home as much as she wanted me gone. "I know it's been an adjustment," David said, his voice softer. "But she's my mother, Lisa. She needs us right now. She needs to go to an assisted living facility. There are plenty of nice places where she could have her own apartment but still have help if she needs it. We could visit her regularly, make sure she's okay. But David, I can't live like this anymore. I feel like a prisoner in my own home." An assisted living facility? Lisa, she's only 65, and she's perfectly capable of living independently. She just needs a little more time to build up her confidence. Then she can build up her confidence in her own house. I want her gone, David. I want our life back." There was a long silence, and I held my breath, waiting to hear how my son would respond to his wife's ultimatum. "What are you saying, exactly?" "I'm saying that if your mother isn't gone by the end of next month, I'm going to start looking for my own apartment. I didn't sign up for this, David. I married you, not her. You're threatening to leave me over this. I'm telling you that I have limits, and I've reached them. I can't continue living like this. It's affecting my work, my sleep, my mental health. Something has to give." I stood there on the patio, feeling like an intruder in my son's life, a burden that was threatening to destroy his marriage. The rational part of me knew that Lisa was being unreasonable. I had been nothing but polite and considerate during my stay. But the emotional part of me was devastated by the revelation that my presence was causing such conflict. I quietly made my way back around to the front of the house and entered through the front door, making enough noise to alert them to my return. When I walked into the kitchen, both David and Lisa were sitting at the table, looking like nothing had happened. "How was your walk, Mom?" David asked, his voice artificially cheerful. "Lovely," I replied, forcing a smile. "The weather is perfect today." But inside, I was making plans. I couldn't continue to be the source of conflict in my son's marriage. I would have to find a way to leave, even if I wasn't entirely ready to live alone again. #the plan to leave that night. I called my sister Helen and told her about the conversation I had overheard. "That little witch," Helen said immediately. "Margaret, you have every right to be there. You're recovering from a stroke, and David invited you to stay. She has no business making you feel unwelcome in your son's home." "But Helen, what if she's right? What if I am overstaying my welcome? What if I'm being a burden?" "Don't you dare let that woman make you question yourself. You've been nothing but gracious and helpful. I've seen how hard you've worked to get your strength back. You're not milking anything, you're being appropriately cautious about your health." But despite Helen's reassurances, I knew I had to make a plan to leave. I couldn't continue to live in a house where I wasn't wanted, and I couldn't be responsible for the breakdown of David's marriage, even if I thought Lisa was being unreasonable. I started looking at apartments in senior-friendly communities, places where I could have my independence but still have access to help if I needed it. I scheduled tours and began the process of getting back on waiting lists I had removed myself from when David first invited me to stay with them. I also started doing more things independently, driving myself to all my appointments, doing more cooking and cleaning, trying to prove to both Lisa and myself that I was capable of living on my own again. #the unexpected gesture, which is why I was so surprised when, 3 weeks after overhearing that conversation, Lisa approached me with what seemed like an olive branch. It was a Thursday evening in early August. David was working late, and Lisa and I had been successfully avoiding each other all day. I was reading in the living room when she appeared in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Margaret," she said, her voice softer than I had heard it in months. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I looked up from my book, immediately wary. Lisa never initiated conversations with me unless David was around to witness her making an effort. "Of course," I said, setting my book aside. She sat down in the chair across from me, fidgeting with her hands in a way that seemed genuinely anxious rather than calculated. "I know things have been tense between us," she began. "And I want you to know that I feel bad about that. You're David's mother, and you're important to him, which means you should be important to me too." I was so shocked by this admission that I didn't know how to respond. In all the time I had known Lisa, she had never acknowledged any problems between us, much less expressed regret about them. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe we could start over. Try to build a better relationship. I know I haven't been the most welcoming host, and I want to change that." "That's very kind of you to say. Actually, I was hoping I could make it up to you by cooking dinner tomorrow night. Something special, just for you. David's going to be at that conference in Seattle until Saturday, so it would just be the two of us. We could have a nice meal and really talk, get to know each other better." I stared at her, completely taken aback. In the 3 years I had known Lisa, she had never once cooked a meal specifically for me. She rarely cooked at all, and when she did, it was usually something simple that David had requested. "You want to cook dinner for me?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. "I know it sounds strange," she said with a small laugh. "I'm not exactly known for my culinary skills. But I found this recipe for chicken masala that looks really delicious, and I know you like Italian food. I thought it might be a nice way for us to spend some time together without David mediating between us." There was something about her demeanor that seemed different, more genuine than I had ever seen her. Maybe the conversation I had overheard had been a moment of frustration rather than her true feelings. Maybe she really did want to improve our relationship. "That sounds lovely," I heard myself saying. "Are you sure you don't mind going to all that trouble?" "Not at all. I want to do this. I think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like the chance to show you that I can be the daughter-in-law you deserve." After she left the room, I sat there feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. Maybe Lisa was sincere about wanting to improve our relationship. Maybe the stress of having me in her home had just brought out the worst in her, and now she was ready to make an effort. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, if we were going to be family, we needed to find a way to get along. I had no idea that Lisa's sudden change of heart had nothing to do with building a relationship and everything to do with getting rid of me permanently. The night of the dinner Friday evening arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation in the house. David had left for his conference in Seattle that morning, kissing both Lisa and me goodbye and expressing his delight that we were finally making an effort to bond. "This is exactly what I've been hoping for," he had said to me privately before leaving. "I know you two will get along great once you really get to know each other." If only he knew how much I already knew about his wife's true feelings toward me. Throughout the day, I could hear Lisa moving around the kitchen, which was unusual for her. She had apparently gone shopping early in the morning, returning with several bags of groceries. The sounds of chopping, mixing, and what seemed like genuine cooking preparation drifted through the house. Around 4 o'clock, she appeared at my bedroom door, where I was reading. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, and for a moment, she almost seemed genuinely concerned. "Very well, thank you. How is the dinner preparation going?" "Great. I'm really excited about this recipe. It's going to be delicious." She paused, then added, "I hope you're hungry. I might have made too much food." "It smells wonderful," I said, though I hadn't actually noticed any particular aroma. "What time would you like to eat?" "How about 7? That will give me time to finish everything and set the table nicely." "That sounds perfect." As she turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Margaret, I really am glad we are doing this. I feel like we've wasted so much time being distant from each other." There was something in her voice that I couldn't quite identify. It sounded almost like sadness, or perhaps regret. For a moment, I wondered if I had been too hard on her, too quick to judge her motives. "I'm glad too," I replied. "I've always hoped we could be closer." She smiled, a real smile this time, not the artificial one I was used to seeing, and disappeared back down the hallway. The elaborate preparation. As evening approached, I could hear Lisa setting the table in the dining room. The good china was coming out. I could tell by the distinctive sound it made when she placed it on the table. She was clearly going to a lot of effort for this dinner. At 6:30, I decided to get dressed for the occasion. I put on one of my nicer blouses and a pair of dress pants, applied a little makeup, and even wore the pearl earrings that David's father had given me for our anniversary many years ago. If Lisa was making an effort, I wanted to show that I appreciated it. When I came downstairs at 7 o'clock, I was genuinely impressed by what I saw. The dining room table was set with the good china, cloth napkins, and even candles. Lisa had put on a dress and done her hair, and she looked more elegant than I had ever seen her. "This is beautiful," I said, looking around the room. "You've gone to so much trouble." "I wanted tonight to be special," she replied. "I felt like we needed a fresh start, and I thought a nice dinner would be the perfect way to begin." The smell of cooking food was stronger now, and it did smell delicious. I could detect garlic, herbs, and what might have been wine in the sauce. "Can I help with anything?" I offered. "Absolutely not. Tonight, you're my guest. Just sit down and relax. I'll bring everything out." I took my seat at the table and watched as Lisa bustled back and forth between the kitchen and dining room, bringing out a beautiful salad, fresh bread, and a bottle of wine. "I hope you don't mind that I opened some wine," she said as she poured me a glass. "I thought it would go well with the chicken." "That's lovely. Thank you." The wine was expensive. I could tell by the label. This was definitely not something Lisa would normally spend money on, which made me think she was really serious about making this evening special. The main course. Finally, Lisa emerged from the kitchen carrying a large serving platter with what looked like a beautiful chicken masala. The presentation was impressive. She had clearly taken time to make it look restaurant quality. "This looks incredible," I said, and I meant it. "I had no idea you were such a good cook." "I've been practicing," she said with a laugh. "I figured it was time I learned how to make something more sophisticated than grilled cheese sandwiches." She began serving the chicken onto our plates, giving me a generous portion along with rice and vegetables. Everything looked perfectly prepared and smelled divine. "Before we eat," Lisa said, raising her wine glass, "I'd like to make a toast." I raised my glass as well, curious about what she would say. "To new beginnings," she said, looking directly into my eyes. "And to family." "To family," I agreed, and we clinked glasses. Lisa took a sip of her wine, then picked up her fork and knife. "Well, let's see how this turned out," she said with a nervous laugh. I was about to take my first bite when Lisa's phone rang in the kitchen. "Oh, that might be work," she said, looking apologetic. "I'm so sorry, but I should probably check. Some of my clients are on the West Coast, and they don't always respect time zones. I'll just be a second." She hurried out of the room, leaving me alone with the beautiful dinner she had prepared. I waited politely for her to return, not wanting to start eating without her. The phone call that changed everything from the dining room. I could hear Lisa talking in the kitchen, though I couldn't make out the words. Her voice sounded animated, almost excited, which seemed odd for a business call on a Friday evening. Minutes passed, and she was still on the phone. I began to feel a bit awkward sitting there with my food getting cold, but I didn't want to be rude by starting without her. After about 10 minutes, Lisa's voice suddenly became much louder, and I could hear what sounded like an argument brewing. "What do you mean you can't do it?" I heard her say sharply. "We agreed on tonight." There was a pause, then her voice rose even higher. "No, that's not acceptable. The timing has to be perfect, or the whole thing falls apart." I was starting to feel uncomfortable, as if I was overhearing something private. But Lisa's voice was so loud now that it was impossible not to hear her. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice taking on a tone I had never heard before, cold, commanding, almost threatening. "If you don't follow through on what we discussed, you'll regret it. I have ways of making your life very difficult." My blood ran cold. This was definitely not a work call about marketing clients. This sounded like something much more serious and much more sinister. "Fine," Lisa said after another pause. "But this better be the last change of plans. And it better work perfectly, or we are both in trouble." I heard her hang up the phone, followed by what sounded like her pacing around the kitchen. She was muttering to herself, but I couldn't make out the words. Then, suddenly, there was silence. ## the return. When Lisa came back into the dining room, she looked flustered and upset. Her carefully styled hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a sheen of perspiration on her forehead. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Crisis at work. You know how it is." But I could see that whatever had happened on that phone call had rattled her significantly. Her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her napkin. "Is everything all right?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect that nothing about this evening was all right. "Oh yes, everything's fine," she said quickly. "Just some client drama. Nothing I can't handle." She looked down at her plate, then back at me. "Your food must be getting cold. Please, go ahead and start eating. Don't wait for me." I picked up my fork, but something in Lisa's demeanor was making me increasingly uneasy. The phone call had clearly upset her plans somehow, and the way she was looking at my plate, with what almost seemed like anticipation, was making alarm bells go off in my head. "Actually," I said, setting my fork down, "I think I might wait for you. It's nicer to eat together." "No, really," Lisa insisted, her voice a bit too urgent. "I insist. You should eat while it's still warm. I need to check on something in the kitchen anyway." She started to get up from the table, but as she did, she accidentally knocked over her wine glass. The red wine spilled across the white tablecloth and splashed onto her plate. "Oh no," she exclaimed, looking genuinely distressed. "I'm so clumsy. Let me clean this up." She grabbed her napkin and started dabbing at the wine, but in her haste, she somehow managed to knock her fork off the table as well. As she bent down to pick it up, she accidentally bumped the table with her hip, causing my wine glass to wobble precariously. "Lisa, be careful," I said, reaching out to steady my glass. But it was too late. In trying to prevent my glass from falling, I accidentally knocked my plate with my elbow, sending some of the chicken masala sliding across the table toward Lisa's side. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, mortified by the mess we were creating. No, it's fine," Lisa said, but she looked even more flustered now. "Here, let me fix this." In her attempt to clean up the spilled food, Lisa somehow managed to mix up our plates. In all the confusion of spilled wine, scattered food, and our attempts to clean everything up, the carefully set table had become a disaster. "You know what?" Lisa said with a forced laugh. "Let's just forget about the fancy presentation. We can eat family style." She gathered up the food that was still salvageable and began redistributing it onto our plates. But in her agitation, she seemed to have lost track of which plate was which. "There," she said, setting a plate in front of me. "Good as new." I looked down at the plate, which contained what appeared to be mostly the food that had been on Lisa's side of the table. But I didn't want to make a fuss after the chaos we had just experienced. "Thank you," I said. "It still looks delicious." Lisa sat down with her own plate, which I now realized contained most of the food that had originally been intended for me. She picked up her fork and took a large bite. She said, though her smile seemed forced. Not bad for my first attempt. I was about to take a bite myself when I noticed something odd. Lisa had taken several more bites of her food, but instead of looking pleased with her culinary effort, she was starting to look concerned. "How is it?" I asked. It's fine," she said, but her voice sounded strained. She took another bite, chewed slowly, then set down her fork. "Actually," she said, putting her hand to her throat, "I think I might have used too much salt. Does yours taste salty to you?" I hadn't tasted mine yet, but before I could answer, Lisa suddenly pushed her chair back from the table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sounding hoarse. "I think I need some water." She stood up quickly, but immediately swayed on her feet, gripping the back of her chair for support. "Lisa, are you all right?" I asked, alarmed by her sudden change in demeanor. I'm fine," she said, but she clearly wasn't. Her face had gone pale, and she was breathing heavily. "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested, standing up to help her. "No, I just need." She started to say, but then she doubled over, clutching her stomach. Hashtag the realization as I watched Lisa struggle with what appeared to be sudden and severe illness, a horrible realization began to dawn on me. The mysterious phone call, her insistence that I eat first, her agitation when our plates got mixed up, it all started to make a terrible kind of sense. "Lisa," I said carefully, "what exactly did you put in this chicken masala?" She looked up at me with eyes that were now wide with panic. Just the usual ingredients. Chicken, mushrooms, wine. What else?" I pressed. She tried to stand up straighter, but another wave of whatever was affecting her caused her to double over again. "Nothing else," she gasped. "Just cooking ingredients." But I could see in her eyes that she was lying. Whatever was happening to her, it wasn't from too much salt or a bad mushroom. "Lisa, I think we need to call 911, I said, moving toward the phone. "No," she said sharply, then immediately tried to soften her tone. "No, I'm sure it's just, maybe I'm coming down with something. The flu, maybe." But this wasn't the flu. This looked like poisoning. And if our plates had gotten mixed up the way I suspected they had, then the plate Lisa was eating from was the one that had originally been intended for me. Hashtag the truth begins to emerge, Lisa," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that was growing in my chest. "I need you to tell me exactly what you put in this food." She was now sitting on the floor, leaning against the dining room wall, her skin taking on a grayish pallor that terrified me. "I told you," she whispered. "Just normal ingredients." "Then why are you sick and I'm not?" She looked at me with what I could only describe as hatred mixed with fear. "You didn't eat any," she said. "Because we mixed up the plates. Lisa, the plate you're eating from was originally mine, wasn't it?" The look of panic that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know. "What did you put in my food?" I asked again, this time with more force. Lisa closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall. For a moment, I thought she might pass out, but then she opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "Rat poison," she whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. "What did you say?" "Rat poison," she repeated, louder this time. "I put rat poison in the chicken masala that was supposed to be yours." I felt like the world was tilting around me. "You tried to poison me." Lisa laughed bitterly, a sound that was more like a sob. "Tried? I did poison you. Except I'm the one who ate it." The full horror of the situation crashed over me. My daughter-in-law had attempted to murder me by poisoning my dinner, but in the confusion of the spilled wine and mixed-up plates, she had accidentally poisoned herself instead. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I want you gone," she said, her voice filled with venom despite her weakened state. "I want you out of my house, out of my life, out of my marriage. I want you dead." The confession. As Lisa's condition continued to deteriorate, her inhibitions seemed to disappear along with her physical strength. The carefully maintained facade of the dutiful daughter-in-law crumbled completely, revealing the depth of her hatred for me. "Do you have any idea what it's been like?" she said, her words slurring slightly. "Living with you, pretending to care about you, listening to David talk about his wonderful mother." "Lisa, we need to get you to a hospital," I said, but she waved me away. "You ruined everything," she continued. "David and I were happy before you moved in. We had our own life, our own space, our own plans. And then you had your little stroke and suddenly everything became about you." "I never asked to move in here," I said. David insisted. "Because you manipulated him. You made him feel guilty, made him think he was a bad son if he didn't take care of Mommy." The poison was clearly affecting her ability to think rationally, but I could see that these weren't new thoughts brought on by her illness. This was how she had really felt all along. "I was never trying to manipulate anyone," I said. "I just needed help while I recovered." "Recovered?" Lisa laughed harshly. "You've been recovered for months. You could have left anytime, but you didn't want to. You wanted to stay here and play house, be the center of attention, be David's #1 priority again." "That's not true." "Isn't it? You loved having him fuss over you, worry about you, choose you over me every single time. Well, I got tired of competing with Mommy for my husband's attention." The hatred in her voice was so intense that it made me take a step backward. This woman had been living in my son's house, sharing his bed, sitting at his dinner table, all while harboring a murderous rage against me. "So you decided to kill me?" I asked. "I decided to solve the problem," she said. "If you were gone, David would grieve for a while, but then we could get back to our real life. Our life without you in it." The plan revealed. As Lisa's physical condition worsened, she seemed compelled to tell me everything, as if confessing her sins before she died. "It was supposed to be perfect," she said, her voice getting weaker. "A nice dinner between mother and daughter-in-law. You would eat the poisoned food, get sick during the night, and by morning you'd be dead. Natural causes. Everyone would assume your heart just couldn't handle the stress of another health crisis." "But the phone call," I said. "Something went wrong." Lisa nodded weakly. "My contact at the hospital. The nurse who was supposed to falsify the death certificate if there were any questions. She got cold feet at the last minute, said she couldn't go through with it." I stared at her in horror. "You had someone at the hospital involved in this?" "Money talks," Lisa said with a bitter smile. "But apparently not loudly enough. When she backed out, I knew I had to be more careful about the dosage, make sure it looked more natural. That's why I was so flustered when I came back from the kitchen. And then we mixed up the plates." She confirmed. "The universe's idea of a joke, I guess." Lisa's breathing was becoming more labored, and I knew I had to make a decision about calling for help. Part of me wanted to let her suffer the consequences of her own actions, but I couldn't just watch someone die, even someone who had tried to kill me. "I'm calling 911, I said, moving toward the phone. "Don't," Lisa said weakly. "Please. If I survive this, I'll go to prison. My life will be over anyway." "Your life doesn't have to be over," You can get help, therapy. For what? For hating you? For wanting my husband to choose me over his mother? Those aren't mental health issues, Margaret. Those are just facts. But I was already dialing 911. Whatever Lisa had done, I couldn't let her die on my watch. The aftermath begins. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and the house was suddenly filled with people asking questions I wasn't sure how to answer. Lisa was conscious but barely coherent as they loaded her onto a stretcher. What did she ingest? One of the paramedics asked me. I looked at Lisa, who was watching me with what appeared to be resignation. She knew that whatever I said next would determine whether this incident was treated as an accident or something much more serious. Rat poison, I said quietly. She accidentally ate rat poison. The paramedic's eyebrows shot up. Accidentally? How does someone accidentally eat rat poison? She was trying to get rid of mice in the kitchen. Some of the poison must have contaminated the food somehow. It was a weak story, but it was the best I could come up with on short notice. I wasn't ready to tell the authorities that my daughter-in-law had tried to murder me, especially not while she was fighting for her life. As they wheeled Lisa out to the ambulance, she caught my eye one last time. I couldn't read the expression on her face. It might have been gratitude for not immediately revealing her attempted murder, or it might have been anger that I had called for help at all. "Are you coming with us to the hospital?" one of the paramedics asked. I looked around the dining room, which still bore the evidence of our disastrous dinner: spilled wine, scattered food, the remnants of what was supposed to have been my last meal. "Yes," I said. "I'll follow in my car." After all, she was still my son's wife. And David would never forgive me if I let her face this crisis alone, regardless of what she had done to me. But as I gathered my purse and keys, I knew that nothing would ever be the same between us again. The mask had finally slipped completely, and I had seen the true face of the woman my son had married. The question now was what I was going to do with that knowledge. The hospital vigil, the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital, was chaos that Friday night. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing the nice blouse and pearl earrings I had put on for what I thought would be a pleasant dinner with my daughter-in-law. Instead, I was waiting to find out if she would survive her attempt to murder me. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 hours ago, Lisa had been planning my death. Now I was the only person who knew the truth, and I was choosing to protect her secret. The doctors had pumped her stomach and were treating her for rat poison ingestion. They seemed puzzled by how she could have accidentally consumed such a large quantity, but they were too focused on saving her life to ask detailed questions. Around midnight, Dr. Peterson came out to speak with me. "Mrs. Cooper is stable for now," he said. "We've managed to remove most of the poison, but the next 24 hours will be critical. Rat poison affects blood clotting, so we are monitoring closely for internal bleeding." "Will she be all right?" I asked. "It's too early to say definitively, but I'm cautiously optimistic. However, I have to ask, do you have any idea how this could have happened? The amount of poison suggests more than just accidental contamination." I had been dreading this question. She's been very stressed lately. She works from home and has been dealing with difficult clients. She mentioned we had mice in the kitchen, and she'd been putting out poison. I think maybe she was distracted while cooking. Dr. Peterson looked skeptical but nodded. "We'll need to keep her here for at least a week for observation." If only he knew how fortunate she really was that I was covering for her. The call to David. I waited until morning to call David, knowing that hearing about Lisa's condition in the middle of the night would only make him panic more. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "David, I need to tell you something. Lisa is in the hospital." "What? What happened?" Is she okay? She's stable now, but she had an accident last night. Food poisoning, some kind of contamination in the kitchen. I'm coming home right now. I'll catch the next flight. David, there's no need to panic. She's getting excellent care. Mom, my wife is in the hospital. I'm coming home. I couldn't argue with that. I'll stay with her until you get here. After I hung up, I sat in the hospital cafeteria wondering what I was going to tell David when he arrived. He would want to know exactly what had happened. ## Lisa's awakening. I was dozing in the chair next to Lisa's bed when she finally woke up around noon on Saturday. Her eyes opened slowly, and it took her a moment to focus on my face. Margaret, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Hello, Lisa. How are you feeling? She blinked several times, as if trying to remember. Then I saw the moment when the memories came flooding back. Her eyes widened with horror. The dinner, she said. Yes. I ate the wrong plate. Yes, you did. She closed her eyes and was quiet for so long I thought she had fallen back asleep. When she opened them again, she was crying. Why didn't you let me die? She asked. The question caught me off guard. Because that's not who I am, Lisa. Despite what you tried to do, I couldn't just watch you die. You should have. I tried to murder you. Yes, you did. Are you going to tell David? The police? I had been asking myself the same question all night. I don't know. If you tell them, my life is over. David will leave me, I'll go to prison. Your life isn't over, Lisa. You made a terrible mistake, but people can change. She laughed bitterly. A mistake? Margaret, I spent weeks planning how to kill you. I researched poisons, found a contact at the hospital, worked out every detail. That's not a mistake, that's premeditated murder. Then why did you do it? Lisa stared at the ceiling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because I was afraid you were going to take him away from me. ## David's arrival. David burst into Lisa's hospital room that afternoon, still wearing his conference clothes and looking like he hadn't slept. He went straight to Lisa's bedside. Thank God you're okay, he said, kissing her forehead. I was so scared when Mom called. I'm fine, Lisa said weakly. Just a little food poisoning. David turned to me. Mom, what exactly happened? The doctors mentioned rat poison. I glanced at Lisa, who was watching me with fearful eyes. There was contamination in the kitchen, I said carefully. Lisa had been putting out poison for mice, and somehow it got into the food. But how do you accidentally put rat poison in food? I think Lisa was stressed and distracted, I said. She was trying to make a nice dinner, and with everything on her mind. I should have been more careful, Lisa said, playing along. I was rushing around, and I must have confused the containers somehow. David looked between us, clearly sensing something wasn't quite right, but not sure what questions to ask. The important thing is that you're going to be okay, he said to Lisa. Yes, Lisa said, looking at me. I'm very lucky. ## The confrontation that evening, after David had gone home to shower and change, Lisa and I were alone. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not telling David the truth. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because I was afraid you were going to take him away from me. ## David's arrival. David burst into Lisa's hospital room that afternoon, still wearing his conference clothes and looking like he hadn't slept. He went straight to Lisa's bedside. Thank God you're okay, he said, kissing her forehead. I was so scared when Mom called. I'm fine, Lisa said weakly. Just a little food poisoning. David turned to me. Mom, what exactly happened? For protecting me even after what I did. I didn't do it for you, Lisa. I did it for him. David loves you, and destroying that would destroy him too. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Margaret, I want you to know I'm not a monster. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I don't usually think about hurting people. Then why? Help me understand. Lisa sighed deeply. I grew up poor, Margaret. Really poor. My father left when I was 5, and my mother worked 3 jobs. I swore I would never be vulnerable like that again. What does that have to do with me? When I married David, I thought I had finally found security. A good man who loved me unconditionally. For the first time, I felt safe. You were safe. Was I? When you moved in, I could see how much David loved you, how much he needed to take care of you. I realized that if it came down to choosing between his wife and his mother, he might not choose me. Lisa, you were never in competition with me. Wasn't I? You heard our conversation about wanting you to leave. David couldn't even promise he would put our marriage first. That's when I knew I had to eliminate the competition. The coldness in her voice sent chills down my spine. The decision. Over the next few days, I wrestled with an impossible decision. Did I owe it to David to tell him the truth? Did I owe it to society to make sure Lisa faced consequences? But I couldn't stop thinking about what exposing Lisa would do to David. He would be devastated to learn his wife had tried to kill his mother. On Tuesday evening, just before Lisa was scheduled to be discharged, I made my decision. Lisa, I said, pulling my chair close to her bed. I'm going to make you a deal. She looked at me warily. What kind of deal? I won't tell David or the police what really happened. Your secret is safe with me. What do you want in return? I want you to get help. Real psychological help. And I want you to be the wife David deserves. That's it. That's it. But Lisa, if you ever hurt David, or if I see any sign you might be dangerous again, I will tell the truth. Do you understand? Lisa nodded. I understand. And one more thing. I'll be moving out this week. Not because you scared me away, but because it's time for me to reclaim my independence. Where will you go? I've found an apartment in a senior community. Close enough to visit David regularly, but far enough to give you privacy. Lisa looked genuinely surprised. You were already planning to leave. I've been looking at apartments for weeks. I never intended to stay permanently. I just needed time to recover. So all of this, all of my anger, it was for nothing. Not for nothing. It showed both of us who you really are when threatened. The question now is whether you're going to do something about that person. ## 6 months later, I'm writing this from my comfortable apartment in Sunset Manor, where I've made new friends and finally feel like I'm living my own life again. David visits me twice a week, and we have a closer relationship than we've had in years. Lisa and David seem to be doing well. She followed through on getting psychological help, and from what David tells me, she's working hard in therapy. They've even started talking about having children. Lisa and I maintain a polite but distant relationship. When I see her at family gatherings, we are civil, but we both know what happened can never be forgotten or fully forgiven. I never told David the truth. I'm not sure if I made the right decision, but I know it was the only decision I could live with. David's happiness is worth more to me than justice or revenge. Sometimes I wonder if Lisa would have gone through with killing me if our plates hadn't gotten mixed up. I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that evil doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like a frustrated young woman who feels her security is threatened. Sometimes it makes elaborate plans and sets pretty tables. And sometimes, evil defeats itself through its own carelessness. The most important thing I learned is that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the choices we make every day to love and protect each other. Lisa may be David's wife, but she had to learn that being family means putting the well-being of your loved ones above your own fears. As for me, I'm just grateful to be alive to tell this story. And I've learned to be very careful about accepting dinner invitations from people who have never cooked for me before. ****, the end ****.